Hi, I'm Shilley and welcome to another video. In today's video I'm going to be talking about orchids, in particular Phalaenopsis orchids, which are arguably one of the most common orchids that you can buy. They have them at most garden centres, at the majority of supermarkets. They're kind of springing up all over the place now because they're quite easy to cultivate and they're relatively inexpensive too. What I'm going to be sharing with you today is just how you look after these, as I've had a few people mentioning about they struggle with orchids or they're not really sure, and actually growing orchids can be quite simple. They don't require an awful lot of TLC, but I'll run through exactly what they need in a moment. When choosing a Phalaenopsis orchid to purchase, it's always advisable to look for a plant that's healthy, the leaves are strong, green, upright, and a flowering stem that has plenty of buds, like on this one here. This is a great orchid to purchase. The flowers are already starting to open, there's loads of buds coming on it. It's a perfect specimen just about. When selecting somewhere to place your orchid, it's advisable to choose a well-lit location that's out of direct sunlight. So somewhere like an east-facing windowsill would be absolutely perfect. Orchids don't like too much light. If they are getting too much light, you'll start to see the leaves begin to discolour. Equally, they don't like too little light. If their leaves are very dark green in colour, it means they're not getting enough. They should be a nice light green colour, as they are here. That's a sign that the light is perfect. And when it comes to watering Phalaenopsis orchids, this is an area where I've seen, from researching this and from my own practices, a whole host of different methods that people use. What I personally use for my orchids at home is that once a fortnight during the winter and once a week during the summer when it's warmer, I will place my orchid under a tap of running water. The sink will then fill up and I leave it standing in there for about 5 minutes. What I do when it's been standing there for about 5 minutes, I will take it out, leave it on the side to drain, and then put it back in its decorative pot or its place where it came from. What this allows is it allows water to fall right the way through the pot and also allows the orchid to take a little bit of water up as it's standing there in the sink. Phalaenopsis don't really need a great deal more water than that, purely because they don't like to be sat in water, they like to be free draining. When it comes to feeding orchids, some people say it's really necessary, other people say it's not necessary. What I do with mine is I don't actually use one of those drip feeder things or any kind of liquid feed because I just don't think it's that effective. What I would suggest using is there are some great products called Orchid Mist. Now, Orchid Mists have a feed and nutrients actually within a spray. And you would literally just spray the aerial roots that are coming out of the surface of the pot and also spray the foliage as well, but not the flowers. The leaves and the roots will take in those nutrients and it will act as a fertiliser. When it comes to repotting Phalaenopsis, this again is another area where I've seen contradicting kind of stories and methods, etc. Orchids will flower and tend to flower their best when they're in a tight container, when the roots are pressed up against the side, they've run out of space, and that's when they tend to bloom the most. If a pot starts to split or the orchid is actually lifting itself out of its container, that's the time to repot it. But don't choose a pot that's massively oversized. When you plant an orchid into a bigger container, the orchid will grow lots of roots and will send out loads of leafy new shoots, but it won't necessarily flower until, again, the roots reach the sides of the pot. So it's advisable to go for a pot that's only marginally bigger than the one that it's currently in, but is still going to give you enough space to leave it in there for a good while. Another thing to bear in mind when choosing a place to keep your Phalaenopsis is temperature. Orchids don't like great fluctuations in temperature, and they certainly don't like the cold. If an orchid has been transported in the cold, or you've had it in a cold car for an hour or something, you'll find that the flowers will begin to droop and drop off much quicker than if they're somewhere that's in a moderately warm environment. The minimum temperature really for your Phalaenopsis that you'd be looking for is about 16-17 degrees centigrade. The best temperature for them during the day is around 21 degrees Celsius. So if you have a room with that kind of temperature range, it has good light, you know how to water and when to fertilise, you should have no problems in keeping your Phalaenopsis going for many, many months. Phalaenopsis orchids are truly amazing flowers. They flower for sometimes several months at a time. One of the things that I know that people sometimes struggle with and are a little bit unsure on is actually what to do when your orchid has finished flowering. When it comes to actually cutting down the flower stem, and there are two ways in which you can do this. So take this one for example. I've had this Phalaenopsis for quite a while, and as you can see, both flower stems have died right back to the main plant. Now when this happens, you need to cut these stems off right back as close to the plant as possible. What the Phalaenopsis will then do is it will send out new flowering shoots that you can train on canes or however you want them within a year to a year's time. That is quite a long time, but the plant will focus all its energy then on producing these brand new stems and hopefully producing an abundance of flowers for you in a year. There is one other way that you can use though. This Phalaenopsis here, it's not very happy, but we'll ignore that for the moment and just focus on the flowering stems because they have finished. What you can do to try and encourage your Phalaenopsis to flower quicker is to cut it at the second node above the bottom. What it means is cutting the flowering stems above one of these nodes here. So the second one from the base in this case would be about there. And what will hopefully then happen is the orchid will rebranch with more flower buds from that point within 6 to 8 weeks as opposed to waiting a whole year. Some orchids won't do this and you'll notice that the stem will just die back. In that case, cut it off at the bottom and unfortunately you're just going to have to wait for the orchid to do its thing. Don't be disappointed there if these flowers are smaller, last a shorter amount of time or are less impressive than the rest. It's because the orchid has already used a great deal of energy with the rest of the bloom. If you want to try and get your orchid to reflower quicker, cut it off at the second node from the base. Now the base of the plant, as you can see, is here. That's the very base where the stem's originating from. This is the first node here. You can see that right here. And then the second node is just here, as you can see. So what you want to do is you want to get a sharp pair of scissors and simply cut just above that node. And what should hopefully happen is your orchid will shoot from here a new branch. And that's about it for looking after Phalaenopsis orchids. I've talked to you a little bit about their care, their watering requirements, when you should feed them, etc. And also shown you one of the key elements of keeping your orchid going for longer than just one flowering period. There are a few other things that I will just mention before I wrap up the video completely, is that just keep an eye on your orchid for pests and diseases. If you start seeing kind of like a sticky substance or any kind of white substance on the leaves or the stem of your orchid, chances are you've got some kind of aphid or mealybug or something like that. Don't panic, it can be remedied. Nip down to your local garden centre and select a pesticide product that's safe for indoor use. Make sure you're clearly reading the instructions on the back of the bottle so that it does specify the pest that you've got and also for indoor use. Also, just keep an eye on the actual leaves for signs of wilting or shrivelling. If they do start to be doing that, you might need to increase your watering or look at how often you're watering. If your leaves are starting to go yellow and the roots of your orchid are very green and slimy, chances are you're going to be over watering it. So just hold up on the watering and hopefully things will start to improve. If your leaves start to shrivel and are starting to wilt and are getting very droopy, then you might not be watering it enough. So it'd be worth giving it a bit of a foliar feed and also giving it a bit of extra water for the next couple of weeks to hopefully pick itself back up again. Don't be alarmed if your flowers do start dropping off. Of course, the flowers that are born on the stems further down are going to be the first to fall because they're the oldest flowers. Sometimes your orchid will hold on to its flowers for a lot longer, other times they'll begin to drop off much quicker. As long as there are still buds coming, your orchid is absolutely fine and your flowering period should continue. If your buds are finished and your flowers have begun to drop off or they've all dropped off, then it's time to act on the pruning that we've discussed in this video. I really hope this has been helpful in keeping these beautiful, beautiful orchids going. I mean, there are so many different varieties. You can got pinks, whites, reds, yellows, all sorts. They're a real diverse group of orchids. And I hope you'll agree that they are quite easy to look after, and I would urge you, if you haven't got one in the home, to go out and grab one. That just about wraps it up for Phalaenopsis then. Thanks very much, as always, for watching. If you do have any questions or comments or want to share your orchid care stories with us, please make sure you post them in the comment box below, or get in touch with me on social media, at Jack Shilley on Twitter, at Jack Shilley on Instagram. My Snapchat is Jack Shilley, and also on the Jack Shilley Gardener Facebook page, which is www.facebook.com/Jack Shilley Gardener. And that's it. I will see you in the next video.